Imagine this. You are Lady May, 16 years old, standing in the Forbidden City in 1722. Tonight is your first night summoned to Emperor Kangshi's chambers. Your hands tremble not from cold, but from knowledge whispered by older concubines. What happens tonight will determine whether you live or die, whether you bear children or vanish into unmarked graves that dot the palace grounds. The heavy doors creak open, and you catch the scent of incense mixed with fear. What you don't know yet is that you've entered the most brutal survival system ever designed, where thousands of women competed in a palace that was part harem, part death trap, and entirely inescapable. Think ancient Chinese emperors just collected beautiful women for pleasure. The reality was so twisted that it makes modern power structures look civilized. The concubine system was a calculated machine designed to produce male heirs while disposing of women like replaceable objects. For over 2,000 years, Chinese emperors maintained harems of hundreds, sometimes thousands of women. Each one was trapped in a hierarchy more rigid than any caste system, competing for imperial attention that could mean the difference between survival and silent execution. The Forbidden City was a prison where beauty became a curse and pregnancy often meant assassination. The imperial concubine system reached its most refined horror during the Qing dynasty from 1644 to 1911. Emperor Kangxi alone maintained over 300 concubines during his 61-year reign. These weren't volunteers. They were selected through systematic draft that treated teenage girls like livestock. The hierarchy was brutally clear. At the top, they measured feet, hands, facial proportions. They examined bodies for imperfections, scars, or birthmarks that might displease the emperor. The 1653 selection records from Emperor Shunji's reign detail the clinical precision. Candidates stood while examiners called out numbers. Number 47, too short, dismissed. Number 62, fingers too thick, dismissed. Number 89, missing tooth, dismissed. Those passing initial screening faced verification procedures that stripped away dignity. Female palace physicians confirmed virginity through invasive physical inspection conducted in front of other candidates waiting their turn. The palace kept detailed records, treating human bodies like warehouse inventory. Surviving selection meant entering palace training that turned girls into instruments of imperial pleasure. Training lasted months, covering everything from walking techniques to explicit instruction in intimate acts. Older concubines and designated eunuchs taught new arrivals the emperor's preferences, his favorite positions, the sounds he liked hearing, how to appear enthusiastic regardless of actual feelings. You learned that showing genuine emotion was dangerous. Pleasure must be performed, pain hidden, disgust transformed into simulated desire. The palace maintained illustrated training manuals that were technical guides for satisfying one man while competing with hundreds doing the same. The branding system marked you permanently. New concubines received small tattoos behind their ears, coded marks indicating entry year and initial rank. Palace eunuchs could identify any woman instantly, preventing escape attempts despite impossible odds. Selection was just the beginning. When your tablet was chosen, the chief eunuch would arrive with an expression revealing nothing. Palace protocol required concubines to be carried to imperial bedchambers wrapped naked in silk carpets by eunuchs. Records from palace museum archives document this practice across dynasties. The reasoning was practical and degrading. It prevented hiding weapons, symbolized your status as an object being delivered, and ensured you arrived undressed and ready for immediate service. Eunuchs who carried you positioned themselves outside the doors, timing encounters with water clocks. The emperor had physicians who determined optimal time for producing male heirs, and encounters were limited to preserve his vital essence. You had specific time, usually no more than 1 hour. The eunuch would call intervals. Half hour, my lord, quarter hour, time complete. If the emperor wanted more time, he could extend it. You had no such option. When time was called, you left immediately, wrapped again in silk, and carried back to your chambers. Immediately after each encounter, palace physicians conducted medical examination. They verified the encounter occurred, checked for pregnancy signs starting from the first month, recorded every detail in confidential logs. These examinations were invasive, performed by male physicians viewing your body as imperial property to be monitored and documented. The system prevented false pregnancy announcements. Too many concubines throughout history had claimed pregnancy for status, then faked miscarriages. The Qing dynasty eliminated this through mandatory verification. Women who refused selection when their tablet was chosen faced immediate consequences. Refusal meant acknowledging you found the emperor undesirable, an insult punishable by death. Palace records contain numerous entries of concubines who declined summons. Most were strangled that night by eunuchs using silk cords, a method leaving no blood and considered merciful. Their bodies were removed through secret passages, names struck from records. It was as if they never existed. Other concubines learned the lesson. You never refused the green tablet. What you've discovered so far is merely the surface of imperial concubine life. The deeper we go, the more twisted this becomes. If exploring these dark corners of human history feeds your hunger for truth, hit subscribe to continue this journey into the forbidden archives of the past. You're about to learn something that will fundamentally change how you understand power and control in ancient civilizations. The green tablet system created nightmare where being selected meant danger, but never being selected meant something worse. Concubines who went years without imperial attention faced slow starvation as stipends were reduced. The palace hierarchy was maintained through economics. Higher-ranked concubines received generous monthly allowances. Those at the bottom received bare subsistence. If you spent months without being chosen, your budget shrank, servants were reassigned, chambers grew colder as heating coal allocations diminished. You watched yourself decline into poverty while living in the wealthiest palace on earth. Some women chose suicide. The palace maintained wells specifically for body disposal, and those wells were used regularly. The pregnancy announcement represented your only path to elevated status, but painted a target every other concubine could see. Consort Zhen's pregnancy in 1894 during Emperor Guangxu's reign demonstrates what happened when you successfully conceived. Palace museum records show that within weeks of her announcement, Zhen suffered 3 poisoning attempts. The first came through food, causing violent illness nearly killing both her and her unborn child. Palace physicians saved her through aggressive treatments including dissolved pearls and gold. The second came through cosmetics. Someone replaced her face powder with lead and arsenic mixture. She survived because a servant tested it first, dying within hours. The third attempt succeeded differently. Zhen gave birth to a daughter, not a son. Within days, the infant died under mysterious circumstances. Official record states natural causes. Unofficial accounts whispered by palace eunuchs tell different stories. The baby palace physicians knew these methods intimately, spending as much time treating poisoning as facilitating births. Emperor Kangxi's recorded 35 sons and 20 daughters reveal brutal mathematics of concubine survival. With over 300 concubines during his reign, only 55 children are documented, a pregnancy rate below 20%. Medical historians studying palace records estimate actual pregnancies occurred at triple that rate, meaning approximately 115 pregnancies disappeared from official records. Some ended in miscarriages from poisoning or violence. Some involved infanticide of female babies with no succession value. Some involved mothers dying during childbirth whose children were eliminated to prevent succession complications from lower-ranked concubines. Medical practices surrounding childbirth combined primitive techniques with callous disregard for maternal health. You would give birth in isolation chambers, separated to prevent contamination of imperial spaces. No anesthesia, no sterilization protocols. Palace midwives, usually older concubines who survived childbirth themselves, attended using methods passed through generations. If you screamed too loudly, attendants stuffed cloth in your mouth. The emperor must not be disturbed. If labor lasted over 2 days, common with first births, midwives attempted manual extraction or used crude instruments frequently causing fatal hemorrhaging. Male heirs received immediate protection, removed from your care within hours, and taken to designated nurseries where wet nurses fed them, and eunuchs guarded them constantly. You might see your son once monthly if fortunate, less if not. Female infants faced darker fates. If you gave birth to a daughter, especially as lower-ranked concubine, you faced impossible choice. Keep the baby receiving no imperial resources, growing up as a servant with you powerless to protect her, or allow the baby to be taken away. Palace records use euphemism transferred to external care. The reality was most female infants born to lower-ranked concubines were killed shortly after birth through deliberate neglect or more active means. Empress Dowager Cixi, effectively ruling China from 1861 to 1908, perfected elimination of rivals through their children. When she began as low-ranked concubine, she gave birth to Emperor Xianfeng's only surviving son. That son became Emperor Tongzhi, making Cixi Empress Dowager with unprecedented power. She systematically eliminated every other concubine who had borne sons by arranging deaths through poisoning, forced suicide, or imprisonment. When Emperor Tongzhi died without heirs, Cixi installed her nephew as Emperor Guangxu. When his favorite concubine Zhen became pregnant, Cixi had the pregnancy terminated through enforced consumption of abortifacient herbs. Palace archive documents detail Cixi's orders, the specific herbs, the forced feeding, the subsequent disposal of fetal remains. The real horror was what happened to mothers whose children died, whether through natural causes, assassination, or deliberate elimination. If your child died and you were low-ranked concubine, you lost your only value to the imperial system. The palace would reduce your rank, cut stipends, and relocate you to the cold palace. This was the Forbidden City area reserved for concubines fallen from favor. No heating, minimal food, no servants. You would live with other discarded women, slowly starving and freezing until disease or despair killed you. The cold palace population fluctuated between 50 and 200 women at any time during the Qing dynasty. Almost none survived more than 5 years in those conditions. Systematic disposal reached its peak with practices making modern execution methods seem humane. Yunzang, the practice of burying concubines alive with deceased emperors, continued in various forms until 1465, when Ming Dynasty officially banned it. The practice didn't end immediately. When Ming Dynasty Emperor Hongxi died in 1425, 30 concubines were selected for burial sacrifice. Historical accounts from Ming Shilu, official Ming Dynasty historical records, describe the selection process with disturbing detail. The concubines chosen were those who never bore children but received imperial favor, making them spiritually bound to serve the emperor in the afterlife. Preparation rituals lasted 7 days. You would be dressed in elaborate funeral robes more beautiful than anything worn while alive. You would attend ceremonies where Buddhist monks chanted prayers for your soul's journey. On the final day, you would be led to the tomb complex where the emperor's body lay in massive coffin surrounded by treasures. The method varied. Some concubines were given silk nooses and expected to hang themselves in designated chambers that would then be sealed. Others were taken into burial chambers and buried alive as chambers were bricked shut from outside. Archaeological evidence from Ming tombs excavated in the 20th century confirmed these practices. Skeletons of women found in sealed chambers, their positions suggesting they lived for hours or days after entombment, slowly suffocating in darkness. The Qing dynasty claimed to abolish burial sacrifice, but Emperor Shunji's death in 1661 revealed voluntary martyrdom continued. 5 of his concubines committed suicide to follow him into death. The Qing court recorded these as spontaneous loyalty expressions rather than forced sacrifice, but historical context suggests otherwise. These women faced futures in cold palace with no imperial protection. Suicide offered path to posthumous honor, improving their family's social standing. Palace officials encouraged such voluntary martyrdom through implicit threats about what would happen to concubines who chose to live. The families received generous financial compensation and elevated social status. The concubines received elaborate funerals and memorial tablets. It was voluntary only in that you could choose death with honor over death with degradation. Consort Zhen's murder in 1900 demonstrates disposal methods evolved but never disappeared. When foreign armies approached Beijing during Boxer Rebellion, Empress Dowager Cixi ordered execution of Emperor Guangxu's favorite concubine. Official account states Consort Zhen committed suicide throwing herself down a well. Eyewitness accounts from palace eunuchs tell different stories. Cixi ordered eunuchs to seize Zhen, who was 24, and throw her down the well alive while Cixi watched. The well was deep enough that death wasn't instantaneous. Zhen survived the fall and drowned slowly in cold water at the bottom. Her body remained there over a year until palace officials retrieved it and provided proper burial. The well still exists in the Forbidden City today, marked with a plaque telling the sanitized version. Cold palace exile served as most common disposal method for concubines who outlived their usefulness. These were women who failed to produce heirs, or bore only daughters, or whose sons died before reaching adulthood. The palace simply transferred them to remote northeastern section of the Forbidden City, where conditions ensured slow death. No medical care, contaminated water, food supplies always insufficient. During winter, temperatures inside unheated buildings dropped below freezing. Women huddled together for warmth, burning whatever furniture they could break apart. Disease spread rapidly. Tuberculosis, dysentery, and pneumonia killed regularly. Bodies were removed through side gates and buried in unmarked mass graves outside palace walls. Forced entry into palace temples represented another disposal method combining cruelty with veneer of mercy. Concubines who displeased the emperor or empress dowager could be ordered to become Buddhist nuns in temples within palace grounds. This sounds gentle until you understand what it meant. You would have your head shaved publicly before other concubines as warning. You would take vows of silence and celibacy, living in cold temple buildings with no heating and minimal food. You would spend 12 to 16 hours daily performing repetitive Buddhist rituals, kowtowing until your knees bled, chanting sutras until your voice failed. Most women sent to palace temples died within 3 years from malnutrition and exposure. The temples kept no records of these deaths. Bodies were cremated and ashes scattered without ceremony. Archaeological evidence reveals disposal scale through systematic excavation of areas surrounding the Forbidden City. Between 1990 and 2010, Chinese archaeologists discovered multiple mass burial sites containing thousands of unmarked graves. Analysis of remains showed predominantly female skeletons, aged 15 to 35, buried without coffins or grave goods. Many skeletons showed signs of malnutrition, disease, and in numerous cases, violent death. Fractures consistent with strangulation, skull damage suggesting blunt force trauma, evidence of poisoning through bone analysis showing toxic metal accumulation. These weren't accidents or natural deaths. These were the discarded concubines the imperial system produced like industrial waste. The system's most horrifying aspect was complete normalization in Chinese society. Confucian philosophy provided intellectual justification. Women existed to serve men. Emperors needed many sons to ensure succession. The hierarchical harem structure reflected natural, universal order. Official historical records from Ming and Qing dynasties discuss the concubine system with matter-of-fact tone, used for agricultural policies or tax collection. The Ministry of Rights maintained detailed regulations covering every aspect of concubine management, from selection to disposal. These weren't secret documents. They were official state policy, reviewed and approved by councils of scholars who saw nothing wrong with treating women as renewable resources. Families took pride when daughters were selected, despite knowing statistical likelihood of death or disposal. Economic incentives made this rational. Selected concubines brought monthly stipends to families continuing even after the girl entered the palace. But inside the Forbidden City, the concubine system continued operating exactly as it had for centuries. Women still competed for favor from an emperor who was a powerless child. The green tablet system still operated. Women still disappeared into Cold Palace. The machinery ground on until the 1911 revolution finally shut it down. You are Lady May again, but now you understand the complete picture. The pregnancy you hoped for means death from rivals who will poison your food, contaminate your cosmetics, or arrange an accident killing you and your unborn child. If you somehow survive to give birth, a daughter means disposal, and a son means the child will be taken from you. If you never conceive, you face slow starvation in Cold Palace. If you please the emperor too much, higher-ranked concubines will eliminate you. If you displease him at all, eunuchs will strangle you with silk cords before dawn. Every path leads to death. The only variable is how quickly it comes and how much suffering precedes it. This wasn't ancient history, separated from our modern world by vast cultural chasms. The last imperial concubine from Qing dynasty died in 1957, just 67 years ago. Women who lived through this system gave interviews to historians. Their testimonies exist in archives. The trauma is living memory. The systematic dehumanization reveals something fundamental about absolute power. When one human has unlimited authority over thousands of others, when no checks or balances exist, when cultural and religious institutions provide justification rather than restraint, the result is inevitable horror. The emperors weren't uniquely evil monsters. They were ordinary men raised from birth to view women as objects existing solely for their pleasure and to produce heirs. Palace officials administering disposal systems weren't sadists. They were bureaucrats following established procedures, treating human life as administrative details. Eunuchs carrying out assassinations and arranging disposal weren't criminals. They were servants doing their jobs in an environment where refusing orders meant their own execution. This makes the system more terrifying, not less, because it reveals how easily ordinary humans participate in extraordinary evil when that evil is normalized and institutionalized. The concubines themselves weren't passive victims. They poisoned each other, betrayed each other, participated in disposing of other women to protect themselves. Survival in the palace meant abandoning moral restraint and adopting whatever tactics increased chances of living another day. The system was designed to pit women against each other, ensuring they directed violence inward rather than organizing resistance against the structure oppressing them all. You came into this story thinking imperial concubines lived in luxury, and now you leave understanding they were trapped in a systematic death machine where beauty meant survival by any means necessary. This transformation of perspective is exactly why these hidden histories matter. If this journey of discovery has awakened your appetite for truth, subscribing means you'll continue accessing these revelations that textbooks won't teach. Your curiosity about the real human experience deserves to be fed. The Forbidden City stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Site visited by millions of tourists who walk through those marble corridors where Lady May trembled. They photograph elaborate architecture and admire imperial treasures. Tour guides mention the concubine system in passing, using sanitized language about imperial harems and ancient customs. What they don't mention are the wells where bodies were disposed, the cold palace buildings where women froze to death, the unmarked graves outside walls containing thousands of discarded lives. The full horror remains buried, like those bodies, under layers of cultural tourism and nationalist historical revisionism. But the evidence exists in archives, in archaeological sites, in documented testimonies of survivors and witnesses. The concubine system wasn't a romantic historical curiosity. It was industrialized disposal of women on a scale that should horrify anyone encountering the full truth,